Welcome to MSP Confidential. It's Friday once again. I'm your host, Luis Giraldo, and we're here for another installment. Today I have the wonderful Jim Turner, president now at IT by Design, joining me for hopefully an interesting conversation about not specifically law firms, even though that's kind of what I threw up on the title, but just overall getting a little bit deeper in some of the verticals where perhaps there's a little bit of a stereotype. Jim, thank you so much for you to coming on the live stream. Welcome. How are you?
Doing great, Luis. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the time and I appreciate the opportunity to share with the community.
That's awesome, man. Let's start with a bit of your transition now to quote unquote the vendor side or the dark side, as some of the MSPs might call it. You know, I was on MSP once. We used to refer to vendors as the dark side.
Sure.
But you spent a good amount of time at Hilltop, Frontline, sort of as some of those M&A activities worked out, and then now you're at IT by Design. But what was a bit of that history there?
So correct. Hilltop was acquired, became part of Frontline Managed Services. Put in a couple years with them. Enjoyed my time with that company. Decided that it was time for me to try some new things. And I'd been talking to Sonny over at IT by Design for years. You know, he and I had known each other through the Build It events, and he had a vision of a role that I could fill within the organization to, one, help other MSPs that were just either starting on their journey towards M&A activity, or perhaps they were well along the way, but maybe there was ways that we could help them to have more successful exits. So that's how the conversation started. Then as we continued talking, he found out about my experience working with the Philippines. I have family there. I've been out there for a Dado, and it was something that really caught my interest. So after I came on board for a few months, they moved me into the role of president for Philippines operations. And what I'm going to be doing here in the Philippines is helping to grow the business. We have over 100 engineers in the Philippines right now. I have 100 more seats to fill, where we have level one plus, and level two engineers that can really help MSPs stateside reduce their costs and move towards more successful exits.
I love that. I think I remember my days as an MSP, small MSP, you know, three-person shop, often considering this idea of outsourcing some of my tech support, help desk, and some of the, low-level stuff, as I would call it. Not low-level, it's equally important, but just tier one, tier two help desk. And at least my objection or challenge was always a bit of like, you know, the keys to the castle. And so, you know, what would you say to the average MSP, maybe considering this move, but concerned about sort of this concept of security and opening the castle up to third parties, so to speak?
Well, we work within your PSA and within your RMM. So you have full control of what our engineers have access to. But what I always used to tell Data when I went out and did their roadshows, I said that to the MSP owners, that profitability, money, those are things that really caught their attention. So what I like to tell people is, show me your four worst engineers, and I'll show you how to quickly add $1 million in enterprise value for when it's time to exit. You save a lot of money, you get a lot of great service, and especially with the Philippines, the accents, the concerns that people have about communication, it's just really non-existent. You could be talking to somebody at our office in the Philippines, and their English is just as good as anybody that you would encounter at a help desk or any business here in the United States. They're culturally aligned, and some of them, you just don't hear the accent at all. So it's something that can really help an MSP. The best way to find out if it's a fit for your MSP is to talk to them. We set up interviews and you get them on the phone, and you see which ones are culturally aligned and which ones have the accent that you think, or lack of accent, that's going to be most agreeable with your clients.
Yeah, interesting. And it's just a very pragmatic approach. You know, you don't have to be all or nothing about your opinion of it. You know, just go ahead and try it. Maybe get through your own objections, just have a conversation. And I think it's worthwhile considering. I've met so many, you know, three-person MSPs that have managed to grow and scale their businesses by simply outsourcing a lot of that tier one, tier two level type of stuff. Which of course, you know, doing with teams in the Philippines comes at a much lower cost than the average entry level in the US or in Canada for that matter. And I think it's
they're lower cost, they're highly educated, and they know how to use they work within your PSA, so they know how to use ConnectWise, Kaseya, they know all the big names. So it's very easy to work with our teams.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I kind of threw in this topic or title of succeeding in the law vertical, and maybe it's a little bit of a clickbait because I think it's not going to be very specific necessarily to the law vertical. It's going to kind of transcend verticals to some extent. But you spent a good amount of time on the MSP side, and maybe just walk me through a bit of the, in hindsight now, some of the key levers of success to working with any particular vertical. And we'll get into maybe some of the stereotypes that the MSP industry has about law firms overall. I thought it'd be interesting to ask ChatGPT if it knew or thought of some of the stereotypes, and it does. So we'll throw those up on the screen in a minute. We'll talk through them. But just generally speaking, the levers that you've seen for success in any particular vertical, love to your thoughts and opinions on that.
Well, I'm definitely happy to start with legal because I think that it is sometimes it's one of the most misunderstood verticals, but I also view it as, from my experience in working in legal for 17 years, that it's one of the best verticals for an MSP to focus on for the same reasons. It's that your competitors are scared of it. They don't want to work with law firms. Every MSP has a story about some law firm where the relationship went sideways, or they have the fear that they work with a law firm and the relationship goes sour, that they're going to have a hard time exiting the relationship, getting their bills paid because, oh no, these lawyers, they can take me to court and it costs them nothing and it costs me everything. You know what? It's not true. The lawyers are more scared of you than you are of them. Downtime for a law firm is incredibly expensive, and they are very worried that if systems go down, that they're not going to be able to bill time. And that's what a law firm is all about. Billable hours. They bill their clients, and if they can't pay you, they can't pay their bills, they can't pay their attorneys. So for MSPs that are scared of the vertical, I tell them, give it another look. There's nothing wrong with it, nothing to be scared of here.
I think let's talk about this mindset around billable hours for a minute, because I think one of the maybe pivot points that MSPs have had over the last few years is trying to get away from activity-based reporting and activity-based value to more of like business outcome-based value. And maybe one of those stereotypes is this idea that because law firms are so hyper-focused on this billable time component, that transcends all their relationships with vendors as well, and that MSPs just end up in this very, very hour, minute per minute focused type of service delivery, which is not necessarily scalable the same way that other services are. And maybe curious on your thoughts about sort of that shift in mentality or the divergent mentality between law firms and MSPs overall.
So depending on the size of the firm that you're talking about, your typical small firm understands the managed services model. They are not too hard to put on a flat rate managed services plan. The concern, though, is you need to be careful that you put on some guardrails to make sure that you're not over delivering when you're working with a law firm. Because sometimes there are projects or applications or situations where you may have to be a little bit more hands-on, a little bit, take more of a white glove approach. And if your MSP isn't built to deliver on-site service from time to time, or you don't have expertise in the line of business applications, you could get sucked into situations where a typical MSP on a flat rate plan may end up losing money by working with a law firm. So that's one area. And I think, as you talked about, that law firms happen to be the vertical that I worked in for 17 years. But there's other verticals where you're probably going to run into the same issues. Working with doctors, you need to understand their EMR, you need to understand what's important to their business. Working with dentists, they have, not only do they have specific software for practice management, but they have specific devices and hardware that's important to them, and they can't operate without these sensors that they put in all their examination rooms for collecting the X-ray images. So while legal just happens to be the vertical I come from, the idea is the same. Understand the business, understand the technology, understand the risks in not setting up your service agreements properly and profitably when working within these verticals. If you are an MSP that's working, you have whether it's a majority or even a large percentage of a certain vertical among your client list, You should consider specializing if that vertical makes sense. If you understand the software, if your engineers are trained on the different programs, it makes sense to take a look at focusing on that vertical. And I will tell you, for years, it was not just lawyers, it was law firms, trade associations, and lobbyists. And that just happened because I happened to start my MSP in Washington, D.C., and you couldn't swing a stick without hitting one of them.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned trade associations, and I feel like this is an area that increasingly MSPs are looking at as a place to go and talk about how technology is affecting those verticals, especially as they start to get into a little bit more of that deeper vertical specific understanding, line of business app specific understanding. They're able to go and kind of communicate a bit more how technology is going to impact their business and so on. And I regularly see some of the perhaps more mature MSPs spending time inside of those trade associations, presenting to their annual conferences. I see this across mining. I see this across legal. I see across this doctors as well. Did you have some experience or exposure to presenting into some of those trade associations? And did you find it was a good route to go to market for new prospects and so on?
Right. So not only did I sell to present to trade associations, but we worked within the trade association for trade associations, the ASAE, which was the Society for Association Excellence, I believe is what they were called. So there's a trade association for everything. So it's not just a matter of going and presenting there. It's a good vertical itself. I mentioned document management systems for law firms. Well, trade associations, they're very heavy in something called association management systems. They're CRM tools built specifically for trade associations. So if you wanted to be an MSP that focuses on trade associations, learn enough about the association management systems and CRM systems in general, because it's a great vertical to work in. It's very easy to understand their business model. And the biggest thing to understand about them is don't sell to them based on increasing their profitability. That's not what they care about. What they care about is education. And if you tell a trade association, I will make sure that you can always communicate and educate your members, that you'll always be there for your members, that's what they want to hear. They don't want to hear that you're going to help them improve their margins in Q4 this year. That's just not their game.
So you said learn enough about the apps that the trade associations use, or any vertical for that matter. And so maybe an abstract question, but how much is enough? Because for the average small MSP, perhaps only the owner or one VCIO that exists in that business is going out to have this level of conversation with clients. How much is enough of the knowledge of those apps?
So I tie that to knowledge of the business. It's the knowledge of the apps and knowledge of the business. Understanding what the AMS is there for, what the CRM is there for. All these services, these applications, they have support behind them with the vendors. So if you're an MSP that's already incorporating vendor support into your managed services stack, you're going to have the support from those vendors. You're going to be able to get them on the phone. When an end user calls in with a problem with most line of business applications, you have to start by troubleshooting the computer anyway. I'll give a great example of this is when they call in to say, hey, I'm having a problem submitting my time in the timekeeping system. And then you find out that the monitor doesn't work or that the computer was disconnected from the internet. They're reporting to you the function that they can't use. You need to take a look at the system holistically and figure out, okay, what are they really telling me here? And sometimes the problems have nothing to do with the line of business app, but you have to at least understand what it is that they're trying to tell you. And then if you have to go and find out that the client or they can't get to a website, well, can they get to the internet? Most of these vendors that are providing these AMS systems are web-based. If you can get to the internet, you're going to be able to access these systems. Once in a while, there's a question within the app that gets a little bit more nuanced, and you have to understand what's going on with the app to help them. But the vast majority, if you can do basic troubleshooting, you understand how to work within an application, you're going to be able to help them. As far as what do you need to know from a sales and marketing perspective, understand what the important line of business applications are for the business. Understand key terms that are part of the business process for that type of client. I'll give an example. If you're working with law firms, understand what a client is, what a matter is. These are terms that attorneys will use as they're recording your time. If you understand that, you can have enough of a conversation with them if they're talking to you about their document management system or their time and billing system. If you're working with medical, understand if they're talking about an EMR, at least understand what the terms are. EMRs, they've got full support anyway. So it's really just understanding the business and the terms that go along with it.
Yeah, and I feel like even that basic level of understanding of terminology increases a bit of the intuition, which I've always felt intuition plays a fairly big role in providing any kind of end user support because, you to some extent you anticipate a bit of what the user was trying to do that they're saying they have a problem with, but not able to explain it properly. That intuition plays a role in, well, that when they do that, there's going to be two other things or three other things that maybe become a problem and so on. And so I do value the importance of understanding to some extent those tools. Have you found in your experience that the vendors that provide those tools will do some level of onboarding for IT providers, in the space of like help, removing or alleviating a bit of the support, I guess, burden that they would get otherwise?
Well, not only that, they'll have training programs, certification programs. When I had Hilltop, I always encouraged my engineers to obtain an industry certification. And some of them would go and get a Microsoft certification. Some of them would get ESXi. Well, what I really valued was when they got a certification with a line of business application. So it could have been a document management system, and they could get a certification with that within that program. And that also helped us build a relationship with software vendor where they might be willing to send us referrals. And I'll add one more thing to that. Understand the integration of these applications, what they tie into. One of my favorite stories came from a help desk that kept on getting stuck on what they thought was Microsoft Outlook issues, but it was a metadata redaction tool that integrated into Outlook. That's what was causing the problem. So when you have enough experience in these verticals, you learn about how these tools, not just what they do, but what they can break. And understand when somebody tells you that, yes, my emails are getting locked up, to take a look at these add-ins or plugins to Microsoft Outlook, which often come from these line of business applications, and understand, okay, that might have been the problem. And it really aids in the troubleshooting of those problems. And it impresses the client that you're able to figure it out because they may have had an experience with another MSP that always got stuck on that because they didn't take the time to learn about the integrations with the line of business applications.
I love this. Just really the shift of focus to the things that the clients are doing. And this maybe shows its teeth in a few other ways, not just obviously the technical aspect of some of these tools and apps that they use, but even the way that MSPs market, I find is super interesting because, we often see the technical blog posts, an MSP talking about, the latest Hyper-V capability, and they get super excited about these technical, functionalities and features in the products that they use day to day. Almost as if the technical prowess is the thing that the clients are looking for. And I wanted to ask you if you did any, client vertical specific marketing or understanding of their vertical as the meat and potatoes of the thing that you go talk about in your blog posts and such.
Oh, sure. I would write content that was relevant to their industry and send them the link so they could read it. I wanted to make sure that I was showing up in the in Google searches when other MSPs were searching about specific problems. If there's a security risk that was really focused in on their industry, I made sure that they knew about it. For trade associations, one of the biggest risks that we faced there had nothing to do even with the internal technology. It was phishing attacks upon the memberships of particular trade associations leveraged upon a news event in the industry. I recall that somebody once did a mass phishing. Actually, it was a mass. They created a GoFundMe page, sent it to all the members of this trade association because one of the founders of the trade association, somebody well known in the industry, had passed away. So they somehow got a list of who was in the trade association, sent out an email with a GoFundMe link, and they were doing spoofing the name and the domain of somebody else well known in the industry. Well, the trade association came back to me and said, "Oh my God, they got our member list. They hacked my email and sent this. No, they didn't. It was just another domain name that they went and registered, had public information. Took the typical whale methodology, found out who the important players were, and referenced them. We helped them to make sure that their systems were clean. We helped them draft a communication to their members, but everything that happened was outside of our control. We could not prevent the bad guys from registering that domain with one extra letter in it that nobody thought to look at. And the people that are the victims, they weren't our clients. They were the members of that trade association. But we still helped to educate them, our client, and they then helped to educate their members, and hopefully they never fell victim to that again.
Wow, that's wild. GoFundMe's for dead people. Like, it's just like there's no scruples anymore. Let me ask you, we were talking a moment ago of, whether it's the marketing thing or spending time learning the tool of the customer. And there's layers to this, of course, because when you're starting to work with a customer in a vertical that is perhaps new to you as an MSP, I feel like there's certain people that do the learning first, whether it's the owner that was having the sales and or onboarding conversation with that prospect, or perhaps a slightly larger MSP has an onboarding team that kind of figures some of these things out. And I feel like the education piece after the fact is so critical, the handover from onboarding to support, or the handover from owner-led sales to a support team in understanding what those pieces of tech or tools were to supporting that customer successfully. And I guess there are maybe, like I said, layers to this. What are some of the things that you feel are important for every MSP to be thinking about in terms of that, handover between owner-led sales or a sales team to support team and or onboarding team and so on?
So I think it's important for if the MSP is going to focus in, it's important that the owner really learn about the business. I think it's important that the owner lead the team to know what line of business applications are important. It's up to the owner to show the commitment in the sales and marketing process that they're going to show up at the events. They're going to invest in the training, because if you try to fake it, you're eventually going to get called out if you don't show that commitment. And I'll just say that over the years, I've seen many false starts about some MSP thinking that they were coming into the legal vertical, or actually we could say the same thing about software vendors coming into the MSP space, where they try it, they dip their toes in, they do it a little bit, they don't really commit to it, and then they end up leaving. You do have to show that commitment.
Maybe the timing of your exit and so on made you miss a bit of sort of the rotation into AI inside the legal market. But I'm curious your thoughts on, the MSP role in facilitating AI-driven anything inside of, I guess, any vertical. But I guess having experience in the legal vertical, maybe you can start there.
Well, while I have left the legal vertical, I've still kept reading up on what's going on, especially if an article just comes up that catches my interest. And I have seen where an attorney used AI to draft a brief, and the AI took some creative liberties and created case law that did not exist. So just like anything else, your clients are going to encounter technology. They're going to wonder why you have not implemented that technology in their business. They're going to try it on their own. They're going to screw something up. And then you're going to have to come in and explain to them, this is why we are not doing this yet, because it's not ready for prime time, or we haven't deployed it and put in the safety mechanisms to prevent us from doing something wrong. It's just like any other automation technology. It shouldn't, the users, the client, they should be coming to the expert. And even if we're not the expert in the technology right now, the MSPs are better situated to quickly get up to speed on that technology to become that expert for the business. And if the client doesn't trust you to do that, you need to take a look at your relationship and try to figure out why they don't trust you to take the lead on that technology. And if the decision and the step you're taking in leadership is saying, yes, we're not yet adopting that technology, that's fine, but communicate it to the clients. Otherwise, they're going to go out and buy something that you're going to have to end up supporting anyway, even if the network and your team isn't ready for it. Seen that plenty of times.
Yeah, I think I may have read the same article or one. I mean, it may have happened already multiple times because there was one Canadian market specific article, and it was because it was a new AI company focused on the legal vertical, where they have actually now, created their own LLM, trained it specifically only on Canadian case law, to the point where if it can't find the information within the confines of the Canadian case law history, it just responds with like, I don't have any information about that, and it can't hallucinate or create information out of nothing, which is what we're seeing when people kind of jump the gun and without understanding the consequences or some of the pitfalls of jumping on the technology too soon. And I think interestingly, even if the MSP it does not necessarily know much about the technology, they do understand some of the ramifications that come along with that. And so I guess in your experience, what have you seen in your conversations with clients or prospects where you can position the understanding of the ramifications better than the understanding of the current technology at play? Because I figure that comes up especially in the process of learning a vertical, learning those line of business apps. You may not know too much about the specifics, but you actually can, understand potential ramifications, even if the tool is not super well understood.
Well, we can go back years to businesses that thought that they were better off backing up their data to external hard drives and taking them off site, as opposed to implementing a business a disaster recovery system. They thought that they understood what was important, and they understood that the data had to go off site, but they didn't realize that they were probably going to end up with a HIPAA violation or some other data breach when they took that hard drive off site and lost it because their car got broken into or something else went wrong. Or perhaps they were using Dropbox to store data and then causing a violation of their agreement, of their confidentiality agreements with their clients. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong when attorneys or other business people think that they understand technology and they don't. And then finally, there's my favorite legal story, which is the lawyer that presented a case virtually to a judge using a kitten filter in their Zoom browser, where they were a talking cat and didn't know how to turn it off because they were using somebody else's computer and they didn't understand how to change those settings. And that video is out there on YouTube, and it's hilarious.
I haven't. I heard of it. I haven't seen the actual video. I saw some of the stuff percolating and moving around, and I think the HIPAA understanding or in any vertical, some of these things that are industry specific regulations are maybe an area that MSPs find out about too late, especially as they start working with a brand new vertical that they may not understand what certain compliance and regulations exist, but just as a matter of best practice, do you find that the businesses themselves understand these things well enough to communicate to the MSP, or does the MSP have to spend some time outside of the actual business they're supporting to learn some of this stuff thoroughly?
It depends on the firm, or depends on the business, and whether it's legal or anything else. You're going to have somebody in that business that's been doing it their way for 30 years, and they're not going to understand that their way is causing a breach of attorney-client privilege, or that the way that they're doing it is causing a potential HIPAA violation because they've not locked down their firewall or their wireless network, and they're allowing patients in their chiropractic office to access their server and potentially open shares. I've seen that as well in a chiropractic office. And this is all data that was potentially covered under HIPAA. So it has to do with the users, the size of the business, the maturity of the business. You're always going to run across this, regardless of whether it's legal or any other vertical.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I had this idea of like throwing in this idea of what are the stereotypes about MSPs working with law firms into ChatGPT and seeing what kind of ideas or suggestions it would throw out. And so maybe this becomes a new segment, but let me cut over to this real quick. and
Great.
we'll see if we can have a conversation about it. So I posed the question to ChatGPT. Are there any stereotypes with regards to MSPs servicing law firms? And it suggested that there are a few things. And so maybe as a legal industry expert, we could walk through some of these and give your opinion or thoughts on them. The first one is that this idea that law firms are technologically conservative. There's a perception that law firms are slower to adopt new tech and tend to prefer established traditional solutions. This stereotype can lead MSPs to expect resistance when proposing innovative IT strategies. Unload on that.
Yeah, very rarely will you find a law firm that wants to be on the bleeding edge of technology. They want technology that works, and they may hang on to technology longer than they should have, whether it's an old server or WordPerfect. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
There's law firms out there that are still using WordPerfect because that's what they were used to, and they saw no reason to change. So I remember going to legal conferences and seeing that WordPerfect actually had a booth at these conferences. It's still a thing.
Wow. So this is a correct stereotype. ChatGPT has succeeded at collecting the correct information here.
Yes.
Do you think MSPs are their own worst enemy when it comes to this? I feel like characterizing the law firms as slow to adopt technology maybe works in contrary forms than how it could be, which is, hey, if you like your stable standard solutions, this is actually potentially a good thing because there's just less change, less chances for things to go wrong. Maybe we're just looking at it all wrong. But what are your thoughts? Did you find that the reliance on older, more established solutions was problematic or actually a good thing?
It's I think it's problematic more often than it being a good thing. MSPs have this really bad habit of carrying the technical debt of their clients. They don't want to propose solutions because they're afraid that the client is going to turn them down and think that they're just trying to spend their money. But often what we find is by implementing more modern technology, we improve the reliability of the network, we increase the speed of the attorneys by preventing downtime, by modernizing workstations, by utilizing cloud services, or improving resiliency by adding secondary internet circuits. All these things help law firms, but I find a lot of MSPs, whether it's law firms or other businesses, they're afraid to sell sometimes. Oh, I don't want them to think I'm just trying to make them spend money. No, what you're trying to do is make them a better business. And law firms and MSPs need to be better about that.
I tell you, there's a quotable sentence in there. MSPs are carrying the technical debt of their clients. And I feel like this is something that plays perhaps into their ability to charge correctly for their services. It's like, this is more risk on the MSP. And every time you absorb the technical debt of a client, you should actually be charging more for that potentially. But it's interesting that maybe the perspective on the law firm side is that, oh, well, we're not changing anything, so it'd be easier to support. And they just maybe don't understand even the dichotomy of those two statements.
Right. When you're not changing anything, it means that you're just letting it sit there and get old and it's going to break.
Yeah, the cost of doing nothing. All right, let's talk about this second one. Security is paramount, but firms are reactive. Law firms are seen as heavily focused on cybersecurity due to the sensitive nature of their data, but are often characterized as being reactive rather than proactive. This may lead MSPs to believe that law firms only make major IT changes after a breach or issue. That one certainly feels like the standard human condition across the entire world. But how do you find this is unique or specific to the legal vertical?
Law firms are really great about spending money on security right after a data breach. Unfortunately, it's with your competitor.
Yeah.
You let it happen. If you didn't tell the client that they had to make these upgrades or implement tools to prevent data breach, they're going to blame you anyway. So you need to stand your ground. And when you make those recommendations and you're talking about them in your QBR, you need to know that this isn't optional anymore. I'll say it about law firms just because that's my real experience. But I'll tell you, law firms are the soft underbelly of corporate America. Once you get into a law firm, you're going to get access to information on so many different businesses. Well, I guess you could say the same thing about medical.
Because you get into the EMR or the records in a doctor's office, you're getting data for hundreds or thousands of people. So hackers like to go after these businesses, and it's intentional because they're going to get data on so many different people. So MSPs need to make sure that the clients are listening to them when they're trying to sell them security solutions.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that kind of segues into this next one, which is that law firms have complex compliance needs. MSPs might stereotype law firms as having overly complex and demanding compliance requirements due to the combination of legal regulations and privacy laws they must follow. This may shape how MSPs approach offering compliance as a service solutions to legal clients. And I think there's multi-layers of challenges here. One is that a lot of MSPs that are a bit smaller are not yet doing compliance as a service. They're not even on their own compliance journey just yet. But I think also the multi-tier understanding of how much data is at risk for the access that somebody that gets into a law firm might have to all the downstream or upstream clients and or organizations from there. But do you think they have the process is more complex than it needs to be, or that we think that it is?
Well, with legal, I would add it's not just about compliance and protection of data. It's compliance when it comes to retention of data, retention of documents, retention of email. That's a big thing for law firms. They have to maintain these records, and the MSPs need to be focused on that. Whether you're talking, when it comes to compliance, I always look at medical, financial, legal, and then my new favorite vertical when it comes to compliance, the cannabis industry. There's a lot of rules, and they vary from state to state. They're managed somewhat with these organizations through their trade associations, like the Bar Association, but you do have to familiarize yourself with the compliance of whatever vertical it is that you're supporting. I don't know that legal is that much more complicated than financial or medical. I think medical is probably the toughest one, but legal, it's a big deal. Whether it's data breach and then the ramifications of having the recover, but also the risk to a firm's reputation. When a law firm has a breach or they get hit by a ransomware attack, it's usually spoken about it within the industry for years afterwards. There have been major law firm breaches, and maybe you've heard of the Panama Papers. People were talking about that one for years.
Yeah. I wonder if there's maybe a link here, because one of the things we've been talking about across various of these MSP Confidential episodes over the last little while is this idea that a compliance program allows you to kind of roll up a bit of the conversation of specific security point solutions that you might have been trying to sell independently or separately every time. And, one of the challenges for MSPs, of course, is that if they're working in contractual ways, it's difficult to introduce new things when the MSP needs it to be done from a security perspective or just covering their ass perspective. Because then the client is not necessarily willing to pay for it until their contract is renewed or whatever thing happens down the line. And what we're seeing is that the compliance discussion allows them to roll in all these point solutions into just, being part of the compliance program. And so my question is, are legal firms more amenable to a compliance discussion because they better understand that sort of in the big context of things than a specific security point solution, which may be too technically complex to understand?
I think it depends on the size of the firm. I think the larger firms are going to be more open to that higher level compliance conversation. I think that some of the smaller firms, just like your smaller non-legal businesses, it's harder to sell them on those solutions because they think that they're too small. Nobody's interested in my data. If they want my data, they can just call me. I've heard that conversation numerous times. One of my favorite, let's call it a trick, or here's my hack for your viewers. When there's a service that you need them to have, roll it into the MSP agreement, tell them this service is starting on this date. Unless you tell me that you don't want it, by the way, I'm going to need you to sign this document that says that you turned down this security solution, because in the event that you get breached in the future, I presented it to you, you made an active decision not to do it. I can't be held accountable if you get breached after, and this solution would have solved the problem. That's what I did with things like
dark web monitoring, with DNS filtering, and even with backup and disaster recovery. You need to sell the right thing. Your client can turn you down. I'm not going to say it's okay, but they will from time to time. Just make sure that you're protecting your business.
A word of caution on that. I feel like Brad Gross perked up his ears somewhere as soon as you said that. And this is not legal advice. I will absolutely put that out there. But one of the things I've heard him talk about is the pitfall of requiring that a customer signs a document of that nature, because if they don't sign it, legally speaking, it could be construed as them having rejected that you told them it was not going to be deployed or installed or provided. And so one of the things he talks about is move away from requiring a signature on that type of thing to simply notifying them that this service is no longer being provided, and just make it a one-way communication, because it potentially could get you in trouble if the client actually doesn't sign the refusal of service.
That's a fair point. I will tell you that never happened. They always did it for me.
They always signed it? Yeah, well, you made them sign it.
They knew I was serious.
Yeah, fair enough. And if this is the kind of thing that as a business owner you're handling yourself and requiring that as part of like continuing the relationship period, that's great. But so the challenge comes when like there's an account manager that's kind of just sending out these form letters to their customers, and they're not getting any traction. They're not necessarily going to push the issue. And so sometimes those things end up sitting there unresolved and creating the problem down the road of the legal liability.
Yeah, I think what happened. I think the reality of what happens with those documents is that there was somebody in the middle there. Whether it was, if you weren't having all of your conversations directly with the business owner, you're dealing with an office manager, an administrator, someone who then had to take that form and say, you know what, our IT company sent us this form, and then by the time it makes it to the owner will usually say, okay, well, maybe we should be doing this. It at least gets the conversation going.
Yeah, fair enough. And I have seen that used specifically as a tool to actually drive acceptance of the solution ultimately, because it just it gives it more gravitas when you say, we need you to sign off if you're not going to buy this. So I totally get it. Right. Now, this number 4 one, non-technical lawyers making IT decisions. Another common stereotype is that decision makers in law firms, often senior partners or administrators, lack any technical expertise to make some of the informed decision making here. This can lead MSPs to focus on simplifying the technical explanations, thinking they must present solutions in a way that's easy to understand for non-technical professionals. Now, this is maybe just a systemic issue overall of MSPs, is that we tend to overcomplicate the technical explanation of everything, because we're not focused necessarily on the business outcomes of the business we're supporting. We're kind of focused on what's good for us in deploying our standards, our baselines, or whatever. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that's not just legal, right? It's every potential client. I've had doctors go out and get Macs that, I want to use this because I saw someone using it. It's so easy to use, without realizing that their software, their EMR doesn't work on it. Or, that could really be any business, because they don't know to check for compatibility between the systems that they think are so cool and then the stuff that they actually need. So you could say it for lawyers, and lawyers are very smart people, but so are doctors, so are engineers, so are MBAs. And very often you'll run into somebody that knows better than you until they don't.
Totally fair. This next one, and I'm going to get your point of view on from two angles. One is obviously the angle of the client, but this idea of billing and budget sensitivities, I hear a lot that people say, oh, lawyers are cheap. And maybe that's one of the stereotypes that prevents MSPs from even trying to go into the vertical in the first place. The perception that law firms are extremely cost conscious, preferring predictable, itemized billing structures, much like how they bill their clients. And there's a lot of conversations in the MSP industry that go around about, like, don't bother itemizing stuff. Like, it just forces the client to price shop you with the competition. But what are your thoughts on the billing and budget sensitivities of legal?
My lawyers were never my cheapest clients. The dentists were. The lawyers, yes, will they question things, but if it makes sense, they'll spend the money. Sometimes it may take a while, and it may take a few cycles of QBRs to get them to put it in the budget. But I don't think that lawyers were any worse than other clients. And
And then as far as misperceptions, this is all goes about understanding your vertical. If you're working with trade associations or nonprofits, you can't tell somebody in Q2 that you need to spend money in Q3. You need to tell them in Q4 so that the money can be allocated and spent in Q1. So it's all about understanding your clients. And to that extent, I'd say that lawyers, especially if they're not a national firm, are going to be more flexible, that they will spend money out of cycle if they see the need more so than some other industries.
Yeah. Interesting. And the other viewpoint that I wanted you to put your lens on is the MSP's own value equation in that conversation. And what I mean by that is I feel like MSPs, and I say this because it happened to me, I feel like there were many times where I thought to myself, oh, my client will never spend that on this like solution. Like we kind of get her in our own way because our own value drivers are maybe we're projecting those onto our clients without them even being part of the conversation. And so I'm curious your thoughts on maybe evolving out of your own value limitations to make sure that you're driving the things that are necessary for the client and not what you think they're going to spend money on.
Sure. Well, that's all about having a process and sticking to it. I'll give an example there of rate increases. How many MSPs fail to increase their rates on a regular basis? When I used to write MSP agreements, I put the annual rate increase into the service agreement so that the client knew it was coming each year. I might send out a reminder before it actually kicked in, but by putting that into the service agreement and putting it into our accounting system so that our bookkeeper, office manager, whatever the role is, know that it was coming, it just took away that fear that the account manager might have had because the client was unhappy with them that week. They didn't want to send the rate increase, and now suddenly 3 months has gone by and you not recognize an increase that the client had already agreed to in the service agreement. So to say that we get in our own way, I think is an understatement. I think that MSPs constantly trip over their own feet, but with fears about, oh, the client's not going to accept the increase, the client's going to fire me. If you're doing your job, you're going to pay the bills. Usually what I find is when somebody thinks that they got fired because of price, no, the price was just the excuse. There was something else that they did, like not returning the client's phone calls fast enough or not doing something. Usually that's the real reason. Then they go out and look and say, you know what, my MSP's been unresponsive to me. The relationship isn't the same as it was. And I found this other guy who's $5 cheaper. Let's give them a try. Usually they're not going out starting the search for a new partner because of your rates.
So
My
true.
experience anyway.
Yeah, I think this goes through various stages of self-pity and admitting, that the issue was you all along. So it's definitely a learned experience, and coming out of the comfort zone a little bit, because a lot of technical owner operators were not super business savvy in that sense, and so these are acquired skills over the years, of course. Jim, this is awesome. Congratulations on your appointment at IT by Design, by the way. I was curious to know what you're most excited to bring to the Philippines team, because obviously your knowledge, your MSP DNA is clear, and I think this is a valuable thing for any vendor in our space to have. But what are you most excited about?
What I'm excited about bringing to IT by Design, and specifically the team in the Philippines, is the knowledge that I have of the industry. And look, I got to say, I've done so much wrong over the course of my career that it's almost impossible for me to make another mistake. So all that's left is for me to do things the right way. And that's what I'm learning in this second act. And I'm able to help MSPs by the benefit of the mistakes that I've made in the past about how to improve their EBITDA, how to improve their service. So one of the biggest regrets that I have is not leveraging global talent previously, because I think it would have made me a lot more money on my exit. But if I can help
other MSPs prepare for their exit better, but also before they get to the point, provide a more consistent service experience through our teams that are MSP ready. They are trained on your PSA, on your RMM. They have a tier 3 escalation point standing behind them, so they don't have to pitch tickets back to you if they can't fix it. There's so much that Sunny and the team have figured out how to do right because of their own MSP DNA. It's just, I regret not using their services before, and I look forward to bringing those services to other MSPs that I've known throughout the years to help them have more successful outcomes and exits.
Jim, that's incredible. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out a little bit with me this Friday afternoon. I certainly wish you all the best, and I'll be watching closely to see how things progress for you, and hope to see you at some of the events in the coming times. Were you just at the IT by Design at Build It in Orlando this last week?
Oh yeah, I just got back yesterday. Fantastic event. We've gotten tremendous feedback that it's the best educational event of the year. Somebody else's words, not mine. So it was a really great event. And next year in New York, New Jersey is going to be even better when we're partying on top of the World Trade Center.
Interesting. Well, I was unfortunately in Dublin, or maybe fortunately in Dublin. It's a great place to hang out, but because of that, I couldn't make it to Build It this year. But thanks for sharing. I appreciate your time again for coming and hanging out, and maybe we can catch up again in the future. And thank you so much.
Okay, look forward to seeing you soon.
All right, everybody. We're here every Friday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern for MSP Confidential. We hope you'll join us again. This was Jim Turner, and now president at IT by Design, but with a long career in the MSP industry. And thanks again for everyone.